Our Old Testament reading for this morning comes from the 32nd chapter of Exodus. We have already heard in weeks previous God speaking to Israel the commandments, what we call the 10 Commandments. And following that, Moses has ascended the mountain to be with God, but that has been quite a while ago. The people have begun to despair that Moses will never return. And it is in that context that the events of today's reading take place. Listen for what the Spirit would speak to us this day. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us." And it doesn't have to be plural. For some reason, the word God only appears in plural in the Hebrew, and so when God's name is always in the plural. "Come and make gods for us who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to Yahweh." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to revel. Yahweh said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" Yahweh said to Moses, "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation." But Moses implored Yahweh, his God, and said, "Yahweh, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And Yahweh changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring upon his people." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Just prior to my graduating from seminary, I attended a kind of pastor's job fair, something called Face to Face. It was a two-day event that brought together scores of pastor nominating committees from all sorts of congregations looking for a pastor, and matched them up with more than 100 pastors and seminary students who were trying to find a call. It was a hectic affair. You interviewed with a church every hour. And there was some sort of matching criteria that was supposed to put pastors, pastor candidates with compatible congregations. Churches that were looking, there were big churches that were looking for an experienced pastor, for example, wouldn't be matched with a seminary student like me, and so on. But no such matching criteria are perfect, especially not in such a big event with so many people to be matched up in such a short period of time. And so I had more than a few cases where I interviewed with a congregation and knew 60 seconds into a 50-minute interview that this wasn't going anywhere. And being new, though, to this seeking a call business, that was okay because all interviews were good practice for me as a seminary student. And on one of these interviews with a committee that was clearly not going to lead anywhere, somehow the conversation turned to the topic of biblical literalism. My memory of this is a little fuzzy, but I recall that they were a conservative rural congregation. And as I answered their question about scriptural authority, commenting, as I did, about how the Bible sometimes can become an idol, and that in some Christian circles it is quite a popular idol, as I did so, I saw a look of horror come over the eyes of some of the members of this committee. I had clearly just committed some terrible sacrilege, and the interview turned decidedly colder after that. The idea that I had somehow compared the Bible with an idol such as the golden calf clearly disturbed some of these folks. Now, I'd heard about the golden calf since I was a small child. I mentioned to children that the story Bible my father used to read to us had a picture of that golden calf in it. And like other idols that I heard about from the Bible, the golden calf was clearly something that the people of Israel chose rather than God. Idols are competitors with God, which probably explains some of the horror in the look of the faces of that nominating committee. Now, some idols are indeed alternatives to God, competing gods, if you will. But Aaron, the person who conceives, designs, and builds the golden calf, does not seem to understand this idol that way. After building the calf, he proclaimed, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to Yahweh." To Yahweh. Not to some other Near Eastern god like Baal, but to Yahweh, the God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, the God who had worked through this person, Moses, but Moses had disappeared. He'd been missing for more than a month. Clearly, the Israelites needed a more reliable way of invoking God's presence, of ensuring that God was there for them when they needed help. Moses had skipped out on them. And so they turned to his brother Aaron and asked that he would provide a stand-in. Now true, Aaron is breaking those commandments that Yahweh had spoken only weeks before. You shall not make for yourself an idol. And the word could mean an image as well. An image of anything, whether it is in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth below, or that is in the water that is under the earth. Now I'm pretty sure that a calf is in the form of something that is on the earth. But these were desperate times. Moses was missing, and God was nowhere to be found either. The Israelites had to have some way of ensuring and guaranteeing God's presence. I'm not quite sure what the symbolism of the calf did towards that, but apparently it fit the bill. And the truth is, most all of us have been there with the Israelites. We may not have been worried about dying in the wilderness, but we've all had our times when we needed to make God available and close to put God on call to be there at our command. Golden calves are a bit out of our repertoire, but we have other ways to make God manageable and accessible. As I mentioned to that nominating committee, some folks carry around the Bible, God at the ready. A quick answer for any question available on cue. However, I do not think that the most popular Presbyterian item. We Presbyterians, I think, are more prone to come up with a synopsis of God that we can carry around with us. Now, this is much less tangible than a Bible or a golden calf, but it is still very functional. Whether our synopsis of God is a no-nonsense deity who judges folks with clear black and white standards, believe this, do this, and you're in, don't, you're down, or whether our God is a kindly, benevolent God who wouldn't hurt a fly. Either way, we know exactly what to expect from our God. Either God is a cafeteria-style God, picked from attributes that we prefer, that suit us. Either God can be found in the Bible, but either God is constructed by us to suit us. Now, when Aaron and Israel construct a God to suit them, Yahweh, the real deal God, is not pleased. Yahweh is ready to disown Israel, who says to Moses, "Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. Now let me alone, so that my wrath can burn hot against them, that I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation." Yahweh wants nothing more to do with them. They're Moses' people now, not Yahweh's. And God proposes to transfer those promises made centuries ago to Abraham over to Moses. God's going to start over. Now, if we take this story seriously at all, we've got to wrestle with some real difficulties here. The God we see in this story is all set to wipe out Israel, but Moses is in the way. Even before Moses intervenes on behalf of Israel, begging God to remember Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, even before that, Yahweh says to Moses, "Now let me alone." Moses seems to function as a Christ-like figure in this story, who steps into the breach between humanity and God's consuming wrath. But do we really think God is all set to destroy Israel? But somehow Moses convinces God otherwise? And the same problem exists with mechanical formulas of salvation with Jesus. God is all set to nail us, but Jesus somehow steps in between. Is this the true picture of God? A God just itching to destroy us, but somehow Moses or Jesus convinces God otherwise. Let me suggest that the story of the golden calf and the story of the cross as well, that in them we see a profound tension that exists within the heart of God, at least insomuch as we are capable of knowing God. The God of the Bible does not finally let us settle on a God of mercy or a God of judgment. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann writes, "This tension of mercy that forgives and sovereignty that will not be mocked is an endless adjudication for the God of the Bible, who permits no final or systematic resolve. It is a tension that we all know in our most intimate and treasured relations. In Exodus, this crisis is kept raw, alive, and unresolved. It must be kept so for Moses and for Israel, as it is even for God's own life." Now, this God Brueggemann speaks of is a little unsettling, a little hard to pin down, a bit problematic for those of us who want a God who is dependable, predictable, and logically consistent. But the God we find in Exodus and at the cross is a living, dynamic God with an exciting vitality missing from our idols, whether those be golden calves or carefully constructed theological constructs built to our particular inclinations. If a non-Christian who had never visited a Christian church, for some reason, decided to set out and take in many congregations along a broad spectrum of the theological landscape, she could be forgiven if at the end she concluded that we worshiped different gods. We don't, of course, but we do have different idols. Different pictures of God that we have constructed from various elements of Bible or other sources. But what might happen if we tossed out our idols? I sometimes wonder if the lack of vitality in many American congregations in recent decades is not because people have figured out that our idols have no life. The images of God that we have constructed for ourselves have proved inadequate for the spiritual longings of many. And so they have gone looking elsewhere. But if we tossed our idols, our settled images, what if we embraced instead the dynamic and somewhat unsettling God of the Exodus and of the cross? All praise and glory to the God who rescues Israel from slavery, who commands faithful covenant obedience, and who comes to us in Jesus on a cross.